Hi, my name is Howard Brown, and I'm with the University of Niigata Prefecture in Niigata, Japan. And today I'm going to be talking about the growth of English medium instruction here in Japan. This is a growing trend, and I think it has implications for language teaching and language learning here in Japan. And so I'm going to explore that a little bit today. Before I start, just a quick definition of terms. When I say English medium instruction, it's important to realize that I'm not talking about language classes that are conducted in English. I'm talking about content classes taught through English. So that would be a biology class, an economics class, a philosophy class taught in English here in Japan. Around the world, there are many different models of this. English medium instruction is one. English as a medium of instruction is a different way to think about it. Integrating content and language in higher education, etc. Here in Japan, these kind of classes are sometimes known as kokusai kamoku, kokusai koryu kamoku, eigo ni yoru kyoiku, and so on. For today, I'm going to be using the term English Medium Instruction, or EMI, as an umbrella term for all of these various different things, because they are really related under that umbrella of EMI. In terms of defining EMI, I'm going to be operationally using the same definition that's used by the Ministry of Education here in Japan, which are classes conducted in English, excluding classes whose primary aim is language learning. So that's the definition of EMI for today. EMI in Japan, as I said, it's a growing trend. The best numbers we have nationwide are as of 2006. Looking through some documents from MEXT, from the Ministry of Education, we see some interesting information about the current state of EMI, or at least the state of EMI as of 2006. 46% of universities in Japan, so almost half of universities in Japan, offer some kind of content classes taught in a language other than Japanese. In my own data set, I've seen examples in Chinese, Russian, French, and German, but I'm sure there are other languages available as well. Looking specifically at English, 227 universities, so a third of the total universities in Japan, offer classes that are wholly taught in English. Now, it's important to note what I mean by wholly here. I'm not talking about classes where an entire program or a whole degree are available in English. Rather, a whole semester of a course is available in English. So 227 universities in Japan offer at least one semester-length course taught wholly in English. Looking at the undergraduate level, which is the focus of my study, 194 universities, or 28% of the total number of universities, offer at least one full semester-length course taught wholly in English at the undergraduate level. Now, why am I focusing so much on undergrad? It's because my primary concern is what implications this trend of EMI has on language teaching and language learning in Japan. And the undergraduate level is where university students, Japanese university students, are primarily accessing EMI. EMI at graduate school tends to be designed for international students who are coming to Japan to study. Japanese students themselves, if they study in EMI, are doing so at the undergraduate level, so that seems to be a more relevant focus for my study. Looking at the pattern of development of EMI in Japan, we can see sort of a pre- and post-2000 as an important dividing line. Before 2000, EMI in Japan was fairly well limited to graduate school. There were some undergraduate programs, but the main trend, the primary EMI in Japan was at graduate school. Also, it was primarily for international students, not for Japanese students, and most of the programs available were in science and technology related fields. So not entirely, but primarily before the year 2000, EMI was graduate school, science and technology for international students. After 2000, we see a change. That international grad school pattern continued. That didn't change, But alongside that, after 2000, we see a parallel program developing. From the year 2000 to 2003, we see a lot of new undergraduate programs developing. They're established at universities all over Japan, and these are primarily designed for Japanese students who will be studying in English at university. And these are a lot of programs in the humanities and social sciences. Over the past 10 or 12 years, these programs are growing, these programs are developing. And right now, as of 2013, we see a lot of new undergraduate programs are being established, and older programs are expanding and becoming more formalized. Turning to the current study, my research question here is basically what's going on. I wanted to track down the current state of EMI at the undergraduate level in Japan. I wanted to know things like how big are these programs and how are they put together, what fields are being taught, who are the students, who are the staff, and what motivators are driving the growth of this trend. Also, I wanted to look into some of the key issues that these universities are having. I was interested in these questions because I'm trying to position my own school's EMI program as part of a larger trend. I want to know whether or not what my school is doing is typical. I want to know if we are forging ahead or lagging behind, and I want to see how implications that I see for English as an English for academic purposes teaching on my own campus are applicable to a wider situation or not. So I was really looking into EMI at the undergraduate level and just trying to paint a larger picture of what's going on across universities around Japan. The current data set, we started out with an overview of the 194 universities on the list from the Ministry of Education. MEXT gave us a list of all 194 universities that, as of 2006, had reported to MEXT that they were doing EMI in some form or another. We started with a cursory look, just looking at things like which department was doing EMI, what was the program name, who were the key people, how many students were involved, and that sort of thing. We ran into a lot of difficulties with this because of naming issues. EMI is not consistently named at these 194 universities, so it's hard to search for things, it's hard to track them down in publicly available documents or on the web. Also, in a lot of the promotional materials that we were able to read, there's a very fuzzy line between what might be EMI and what might be a language class. So we had a lot of trouble tracking down things through this overview. We also wanted to take a look at a more detailed set. So we wanted to get a representative sample. From the 194, we wanted to sample certain universities that we thought might show us the range of patterns that were out there. So we wanted to look at a public university, a private university, small versus large, schools that offer a broad range of departments and programs versus schools that are more focused on a single field, two-year junior college programs versus four-year universities, and places where EMI was offered as part of a content field like economics or sociology, and was positioned inside that department, or where EMI was offered inside a language program. It was positioned as something to move on to from your language classes. In the end, we chose a dozen schools for our data set, and we started collecting an archive of publicly available sources. We looked at their promotional materials like web pages, pamphlets, brochures. We looked at in-house documents like syllabi and class descriptions where we could find them. And we checked published reports as well. We looked for papers written by current or past faculty in these programs. In the end, from our set of 12, we were able to conduct interviews at 8. 2, we simply had logistical problems. We couldn't work out the timing to go visit them and conduct interviews. 1, there was no response at all to our emails, letters, and phone calls. And 1, we had an outright refusal. The dean of the relevant department basically said, no, we don't want to talk to you, and please don't contact us again. So in the end, we ended up interviewing at 8 universities. Actually, 7 universities and 1 junior college, but the junior college was attached to a larger university and shared a campus with them. We spoke to 15 people. 14 of them were faculty members, of whom 4 were program heads, 1 dean of a department, and 3 director coordinator type positions. We also spoke to 1 full-time administrator. 11 of our interview subjects were for Western, 4 were Japanese. And our interviews lasted anywhere from an hour to 2.5 hours. Okay, so turning to our findings, what did we see? Well, the first thing we did was look at how our EMI programs organized, and we found that they fit into roughly 6 different categories. Now, of course, these are not exactly clear-cut categories, but in general, most EMI programs will fit into one of these 6 categories. The first type of EMI program we saw, and here I'm using the word program a little bit loosely, we noticed a lot of EMI being delivered as a few classes scattered across the curriculum. Often this was a foreign language teacher doing a seminar class or another content-based class alongside the regular teaching load of language classes. These are generally isolated and they're not really a significant part of the curriculum. Next, we saw programs that were semi-structured and department-level based programs. Now, these were not really formalized, but there were several classes related to the major being taught. So economics students would be taking economics classes through EMI. These tended to be taught by content experts, either Japanese or foreign, or where EMI was positioned inside a language learning faculty, native English speaking language teachers were involved. Next, we saw integrated departmental level programs. Now, these were more formalized. They had entry and exit benchmarks and completion requirements, and often when the students completed those requirements, there was a certificate or some recognition officially. These are generally a significant part of the students' studies related to their major. So students would take 10, 20, 30% of their credits in English in these programs. Another model was the Extra Departmental Plus Alpha program, our name for this model. Now, this program is possibly formalized with entry and exit benchmarks. And these EMI credits are offered in addition to a major. So we're calling this extra departmental because this is not based on a single department, but rather operates above or in addition to the student's own major. So one example would be the students from the economics department, from the law department, from the history department are all studying together in the same EMI program. This often runs parallel to a program for incoming exchange students. And so you have exchange students who are coming to Japan for their year abroad, for their semester abroad, who are taking EMI classes. And then Japanese students, often referred to as the home students, the domestic students, they are also joining these programs. Very often in the plus alpha type programs, students will receive an additional diploma or a certificate when they graduate. So they graduate with a degree in their own major, plus a certificate that shows they've completed this EMI program as well. Another pattern we saw is where the entire degree, a bachelor's degree, is being taught in English. So all of the classes associated with that degree are taught in English. This is a rare phenomenon in Japan, but it is growing, especially since the implementation of the Global 30 program. The 13 Global 30 universities, plus about a half a dozen others, offer degree programs taught in English. So it's very hard to put an exact number on this right now, but there are somewhere between 40 and 45 degree programs in English at the undergraduate level available in Japan. So small phenomenon, but it is growing quite quickly. The final pattern we see is where an entire campus runs in English. This is very unusual, only a few examples of this. The two most famous examples are Akita and Miyazaki. In both cases, more or less the entire campus runs in English. So these are the 6 undergraduate patterns that we see for EMI in Japan. Now, it's interesting to note that there's not a clear division between all of these different patterns, so there is some overlap. And also, we tend to see more than one of these patterns at any given university. So a university might have an extra departmental plus alpha program serving the needs of students from several different departments, along with one department that has an entire degree program taught in English and another department that has a few classes scattered across the curriculum. So these 6 patterns are not broken down by which university has which pattern. We also see the same university offering EMI in several different patterns. In terms of program size, the student numbers are still quite low. The number of programs is growing, and the number of universities that have programs is growing, but each program is still relatively small. For example, in our data set, we see things like the full degree programs have a 20-person cohort, so 20 new students every year. Or in a plus alpha program, maybe 3% of students on campus would be enrolled in that program. The highest number we've seen so far is about 7%. So about 7% of students on campus are taking EMI in some kind of program. So this is still a bit of a marginal phenomenon. It's growing, it's becoming more common, but it's still not a mainstream factor or a big part of university life for the typical student. So there's no sense that EMI is taking over. There's no sense that Japanese is losing its position to EMI. Reasons given in our data set for the low enrollment include a lack of demand from students, or where there is a demand from students, there's a lack of resources or a lack of motivation or political will among the university decision makers for that expansion. Lack of resources in particular, the financial and logistical resources, of course, are an issue, but also human resources. There's a lack of faculty who are willing or able to teach in EMI, and so the program can't expand. Other schools are keeping the programs small on purpose. Their plan is to try to keep the program small for better management so that they can ensure the quality. Or they want to keep the program small so that the elite vision of the program can carry through, that they really want a small elite stream for the EMI program. In terms of fields, as I mentioned before, at the graduate level, science and technology seem to dominate. At the undergraduate level, the programs seem to be primarily in humanities and social sciences. Most often programs choose their content to relate to the student's major, so economics students would study economics in English, biology majors would study biology in English, and so on. Where the programs are extra departmental, serving the needs of several different departments, often the contents are international something, international understanding, international cooperation, global issues, global cooperation, international or global come up a lot in the names of programs. Or Japanese studies is another popular option. And this happens when the extra departmental program is running parallel to the program for incoming exchange students. The incoming exchange students are doing EMI classes in Japanese studies, and so the Japanese students are joining them. There's another pattern that we see at some schools where the content of the EMI program is based on faculty availability. So we have faculty members that are able and willing to teach EMI classes in history, biology, geography, and economics. So they get bundled together as the EMI program. Now, that program obviously doesn't have any sort of coherence, but that's all we have, so that's all you get, is kind of the feeling of that type of EMI program. In terms of students and staff, well, looking at students, we see domestic Japanese students in all the program types, right from a few classes across the curriculum up to the whole campus runs in English. We see Japanese students in all of these program areas. The international students tend to be concentrated in the extra departmental plus alpha programs. Again, the international exchange students coming over for their semester abroad, their year abroad programs, and the degree programs that are taught in English tend to have a lot of foreign students in them. And that just makes sense because that was in fact the government's plan. The government intended the G30 programs to attract international students to Japanese universities. In fact, the public universities, the national universities which received G30 funding to develop English medium programs for undergraduate students, limited their programs to international students only. Japanese students are not allowed to join the programs. Private universities are a little bit more flexible. The programs are designed for international students, but Japanese students are also free to join those classes. Looking at staffing, we see some issues coming up here. A lot of universities report that it's difficult to find a proper mix of qualifications. Content specialization, language skills, teaching experience, especially teaching experience with students who are learning not in their first language, and the motivation, the willingness to actually take on an EMI class. These are not easy things to find in one person. Another staffing difficulty is attached to term limits. Japanese universities often have term limits for new faculty members, 4-year contracts, 3-year contracts, that sort of thing. So even when a university finds qualified faculty, they can't stay beyond the 3-year term limit. This leads to a lack of long-term program stability and a lack of institutional memory. One of our informants said that every March, when the faculty's contracts run out, the program dies, and they have to hope it's reborn in April when new faculty come back. This also makes it difficult to attract quality people because people who have that very special mix of qualifications necessary for EMI are not going to want to take a 3-year contract. They're looking for a tenured position. In terms of native speaker versus non-native speaker balance, where we see EMI happening inside a language teaching program, for example, an English department or a Department of International Communications, the classes are almost always taught by native English speaker language teachers who have an EMI class above and beyond their regular language teaching load. Where the programs are positioned inside a content department, for example, inside the economics department, inside the history department, the teachers are more balanced with some Japanese content specialists and some foreign content specialists who were hired to teach in the EMI program specifically. Faculty autonomy came up quite a bit in our discussions, in our interviews. It's seen as being a two-edged sword. Faculty autonomy is very highly respected in Japan, and it's quite difficult actually for universities to place any controls on what a faculty member does inside their own classroom. So faculty autonomy can allow a faculty member to experiment with EMI. So several of the programs that we looked at got started when individual faculty members or a small group of faculty members experimented with EMI and pursued this new idea. However, once a program is up and running, faculty autonomy makes it very difficult to maintain quality or to coordinate class contents. In terms of reasons for implementing EMI, we see the terms internationalization and globalization coming up all the time. Everyone we talked to said EMI is part of internationalizing the university and globalizing the student body. But to tell you the truth, those terms are not very useful. It's not a very helpful description to say that EMI is related to internationalization, because the discourse on internationalization and globalization in Japan is very, very fractured. And internationalization has taken on a wide range of meanings and can end up meaning many things to many people. For example, internationalizing the university can mean more foreign students on campus, more foreign professors on campus, more Japanese students studying abroad, better language programs, and even in some cases simply a better library. So doing something for internationalization it's a bit too broad, it's a bit too fuzzy. It doesn't really help us pin down the real motivations. One element of the motivation for the expansion of EMI that's very clear is the sense of catching up to the Global 30 schools. There's quite a bit of keeping up with the Joneses going on here. The schools that received the Global 30 funding from the Ministry of Education were already very elite schools, and the Global 30 funding made them even more so. So there's a very clear sense among stakeholders at universities that they have to catch up to the Global 30. So if we think of the Global 30 as the first tier, second tier schools are looking at them and saying, well, if we don't have an EMI program, we're going to be in trouble. We need to compete with them. Let's get an EMI program. Third tier schools are then looking at the second tier and saying the same thing. So EMI is snowballing because of the influence of the elite status of the Global 30 schools. And that was actually part of the program design. Right from the outset, the government planned and intended for the Global 30 schools to inspire the creation of EMI programs at other schools. So we see university stakeholders trying to implement EMI programs, not necessarily because they want an EMI program, but more because they want to catch up to the Global 30 schools. The same can be said of university rankings. University rankings are extremely important in Japan, and people look very closely at where their school is ranked. And there's a strong feeling among stakeholders at universities that EMI can help. That if the school has a stronger or larger EMI program, that it will help their position in the rankings tables. Now, whether or not that's actually true, considering how the rankings are calculated, that's a separate issue. But it does remain that there's a feeling among university decision makers that this is true. And I think that's pushing a lot of the EMI developments. There's a sense among individual faculty members that the student's career or educational opportunities are helped by doing EMI. Students who are thinking about going to graduate school or want maybe to go to grad school abroad, EMI is a great experience for them. There's also a sense that EMI can help with a student's job hunting and their career choice. Now, this is a bit of an open question. It's not entirely clear that a degree program that has an element of EMI in it does actually help with job hunting. And there's some feeling that it may hinder a student's career prospects if they're looking to get a job at a sort of staid, conservative Japanese company who might look at EMI on their resume and think, well, that's unusual. I don't know what to do with that. I'd rather not risk hiring that person. But to tell you the truth, there's no longitudinal data out there yet. There's no real conclusive sense of whether or not EMI actually helps in job hunting. Private universities are using EMI as a way to distinguish their university from others. It's part of their PR. It's part of their attempt to attract more and better quality students. However, as EMI becomes more and more common over the next 5 to 10 years, I think EMI might become sort of a standard element of university life in Japan, and it won't actually be the distinguishing factor it's been up till now. There's also a sense that EMI is a good chance to prepare students to study abroad or to do internships at an international company. Among language teachers who are involved in EMI, there is a strong sense that EMI offers authenticity and validity for language teaching, that EMI gives students a real need for language learning and a real opportunity for language use. So that's seen as having value. To wrap up, I'd like to talk about some implications I see for language teaching. I myself am a language teacher, and this whole research project has been about trying to understand EMI so that I can understand my own language teaching better. First, I see new local needs coming out. I'm an EAP teacher, and I think a lot of EAP programs are taught based on the assumption that the students are going to take that English and use it when they go abroad. However, if they're taking the English from my EAP class and using it when they go down the hall, I think there's a possibility there that new local needs are being created, and the way students are using English on their own home campus in Japan is maybe different than what the EAP teachers are getting them ready for. So there's, I think, a need for a collaborative needs assessment between EAP and content teachers at schools where EMI is a big part of the curriculum. I also see the possibility that CLIL is becoming a more important part of language teachers' jobs over the next 5 to 10 years. I think our non-TESOL qualifications will be more important. Hiring committees are going to be asking questions like, oh great, you have a master's degree in TESOL, that's fine, but what else can you teach? Can you do this CLIL class on geography? Can you take over this EMI class on statistics? What else can you teach? Also, I see a need for new forms of assessment over the next little while. We found in our data a real sense of tension between external and internal stakeholders in EMI programs. External stakeholders looked at EMI first and foremost as a language program. It was English. And they expected the students to be making language learning developments. So they wanted to assess the program in terms of the student's average TOEIC score, the change in their TOEFL score, those sort of objective third-party English measurements. Internal stakeholders were much more focused on the content learning and the students' development of wider worldviews and critical thinking skills. And so they kind of resented the idea of being assessed as a language program. So I think there's a need there for new forms of assessment. I don't see developments in that direction yet, but I see a need for it. Looking to the future, my research partner and I are planning to now quantify the patterns we've seen here. We know what the broad patterns are, but we still don't know how many schools are operating in this way, how many schools are offering EMI for these reasons. So we're actually presently implementing a survey project of all of the 194 universities in an attempt to get a handle on the quantitative patterns inside the broad scale patterns we've seen here. Thank you very much. Feel free to get in touch if you have any questions.